broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Countdown to Reopening, another one of our best practices webinar, Expert Insights on Preparing for the Future While Dealing with Uncertainty. This is part 4. We have a great list of panelists with us today. We're really excited. We're going to give you about a minute to file in, and we'll be back with you shortly. Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another great, what's going to promises to be another great webinar. Speaking with the panelists recently, they have a lot of wealth to share, a lot of information to share, and we're looking forward to hearing their insights. Again, the title of this webinar is Countdown to Reopening, Expert Insights on Preparing for the Future While Dealing with Uncertainty. This is our 4th part in this webinar series. I'd like to turn it over for a few words from our President and CEO, Transfinder CEO, Antonio Civitella. Tony, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday, I think it is, right? Days are just blended into one to another. I think it is Tuesday. So hello, everyone. Welcome to another great webinar. And I want to personally thank our panelists. We have some great experts here that we're going to hear from. Kristi, Paul, and Tim, thank you very much for participating today. And Tim said he's right in the middle of the hurricane, so he said if we hear some noise in his windows, it's just a hurricane. Don't worry about it. Right now, I think it's even a tropical storm. But I want to remind everybody, this webinar is definitely being recorded, so you'll be able to find this one and all the other ones we've done so far. I actually was just going through the list. We started mid-March, so we have so many webinars. Some are not even applicable anymore. They don't make any sense just because we're all figuring things out. Well, we figured things out, and now there's more to figure out as we get to the final stretch here at this point. So again, you can find all these recorded webinars off our website, transfinder.com, on their best practices page. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. And I do have to plug a great product. We're offering this at no cost to the rest of the year, which is December 31st, just in case you guys have different years, calendar year versus school year, but it's the calendar year, December 31st. We're offering a Stafffinder communication app at no cost to our clients, and really even to non-clients. We're already seeing our existing client base that actually have this product are already using it. They're already starting to get themselves prepared. They're going to communicate with parents. This is the time to really start communicating with parents. And I know some of you guys have other products for parents communication. Hey, it doesn't hurt to have additional products at this point. More than one is okay. So just want to let you know, we are offering this at no cost. If you're interested, please email us at freestafffinder@transfinder.com. A lot of finders, I know, but this is an important product. We made this offer, this available in the springtime. We actually think that's even more important because there's so much to communicate on what as you decide, or even once you make a decision. Some of these decisions are probably have to be modified. We have to be all agile. And I know this industry has been completely always agile, always change based on what's going on. I think of just the Northeast, how there's snow days, and you guys are all communicating with each other. Should we close? Should we not? Is it enough? Is it going to freeze? Is it going to be, or is the storm going to start midday? Well, if it starts midday, why are we even going, for 2 hours? So clearly, this group, really this industry, has always been communicating with each other and figure out what should we do. So I'm always proud of you guys. But enough about what I'm saying here. It's important that we hear from the experts. So back to you, Rick. I can't wait to hear what we have to offer today.
Thanks so much, Tony. And I want to make one minor correction, Tony. All those panels that we had before, there's still some nuggets of stuff that you can get out of them, right, Tony? The
That's true.
scenarios have changed for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think the most important part is the capability of people adjusting, and that's the theme.
Yes.
That we adjusted. Clearly, the first ones that were deciding, well, we made some decisions. Once you're making decision A, B, or C, and we decided D, well, it doesn't make any sense on discussion A, B, or C because we all decided D. But
That's right.
The whole theme, though, is that we all came together as industry, and that's really the theme.
Exactly.
So,
and there's
awesome.
there's pieces in there that I think you might feel inspired by. But yes, definitely the scenarios keep changing. So we're probably on F or G now, Tony. What do you think?
That's true. Good.
So thank you. I want to thank everybody again for joining us, our attendees. One thing I don't want to forget to tell you is that while we can't hear you, we are receiving your questions. So as you know, if you've been on any of our webinars to date, we try to get to those as quickly as we can. So our panelists have definitely prepared specific things they want to share with us today, and we're going to go over some questions. But if you have something that's burning as you're listening to what they're having to talk about, we will get to your questions as soon as possible. So please make sure you share those with us. I want to welcome our panelist, Tim Ammon. You can come on board. He's with Decision Support Group. He's also a member of the STARTS Task Force, which he's going to be able to share a little bit more with us about that shortly. Kristi Edwards is with Livingstone Range Schools in Alberta, Canada, and Keith Paulson of Anoka-Hennepin Schools in Minnesota. So thank you to the three of you for joining us. I know it is, as Tony said, very, very busy time for you all, and to spend time with us today is we're very grateful. So thank you. Before we get started, I want to read a little something I think is resonating around the country. It's a piece that was in the Washington Post recently. It's actually a first-person account. It comes from Jeff Gregorich, and he's in Arizona. And he shares this first-person account that starts like this. This is my choice, and I'm starting to wish that it wasn't. I don't feel qualified. I've been a superintendent for 20 years, so I guess I should be making decisions, but I keep getting lost in my head. I'll be in my office looking at a blank computer screen, and then all of a sudden realize a whole hour has gone by. I'm worried. I'm worried about everything. Each possibility I come up with is a bad one. The governor has told us that we have to open schools on August 17th. It's less than 2 weeks now, or else we miss 5% of our funding. I run a high needs district in middle of nowhere, Arizona. We're 90% Hispanic and more than 90% free and reduced lunch. These kids need every dollar we can get. But COVID is spreading all over this area and hitting my staff, and now it feels like there's a gun to my head. I already lost one teacher to this virus. Do I risk opening back up if it's going to cost us more lives? Or do we run school remotely and end up depriving these kids? This is your classic one-horse town. Picture John Wayne riding through the cactuses and all that. I'm superintendent, high school principal, and sometimes the basketball referee during recess. It's a skeleton staff. We pay an average salary of about $40,000 a year. I've got nothing to cut. We buy new programs for virtual learning, trying to get our hotspots and iPads for all of our kids. 5% of our budget is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where's that going to come from? I might lose teaching positions or basic curriculum unless we somehow get up and running. So that kind of sets the table. One person's story, but I'm sure it's actually 1,001 people's story. And so that's why we're getting together, because I think, as you know, I know it's, a classic song and high school musical, but we really are all in this together. And everybody who attends our webinars have said over and over again how much they appreciate people like you sharing a snippet of what's happening where you are. And if they can take any piece of wisdom and bring it back to their district, that's invaluable. So that's why we're here. And I want to just thank you all for joining us. I want to start off by just having you each share a little bit about who you are. And Tim, I know you're unique. You're not at a district, you're at a company, you work with a lot of districts, so we can share a little bit about that. And then we'll go to Kristi and Keith and go get into some of our presentations. But Tim, start off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great, thank you, Rick. Yeah, my name is Tim Ammon. I'm one of the co-owners of Decision Support Group. Decision Support Group's it's a consulting company, works with districts all over the country on a whole variety of transportation issues. We've been part of this best practices discussion throughout, I think, because of the concerns certainly that we've seen with our customer base and the challenges that they're being asked to address, absent, frankly, a lot of the guidance and assistance that they need. And so consequently, we've been trying to help fill some of that gap, either with the identification of sort of additional questions that need to be asked or some expertise where it can be. And so we were also fortunate enough to be one of the co-managers on the STARTS task force. And so we will talk certainly about that and about the outcomes and the deliverables associated with that process. But I think that was a really great experience from my perspective to get a sense for a phrase that I've used in a lot of places now, but how national the problem is and how local the answers will be. And I think that continues to resonate regardless of, or international, with all due respect to Kristi, the answers will be as we start to get into this in terms of individual districts making their own choices about school start.
That's great. Thanks. I like that. Say that next sentence again. How national or international?
Yeah, again, we've said this is an international problem with very local solutions.
I like that. And Kristi, I didn't realize that, but this is our first international webinar. So thank you. So Kristi, tell us a little bit about you and your district and your role there.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I am Kristi Edwards. I'm from a small town in southern Alberta, Canada. Our school division covers a vast area. I think some of your states would actually fit inside where we actually bus. So we do have a really big area, and we have quite a complex routing that we have to do with a little bit of kind of more of an urban setting, but mostly really rural. And it's quite a challenge, and it's really unknown right now how this is all going to look, but we're excited to hopefully get started.
Great. Thank you. Keith.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I'm Keith Paulson. I'm the Director of Transportation for Anoka-Hennepin Schools. I've been a transportation director, we were just talking earlier, since August 1st of 1984. One of the panelists was riding a school bus sometime after that, that I started there. Started driving in 1977. I was a transportation director in another school district for 23 years, and I've been in the Anoka-Hennepin schools for 13 years. We transport about 34,000 students each day. We have 200 large buses, 150 special ed buses, and about 60 type 3 school buses. We've got great partnerships with our private companies that help us get kids to and from school. So that's just a quick snapshot.
That's great. Thank you. And we won't make you guess which one was the one that was on the bus. So one of the neat things about our webinars is that they continue to evolve, which is great. And so after our discussion, a couple panelists were like, can we, all three wanted to share some slides. And the main question that I start off always with is, what's one of the main issues that you're facing as you're reopening? And so Kristi, you wanted to share a slide, and then we'll go over to you, Keith, and then Tim is going to share a little bit about some details coming out of the STARTS task force. So Kristi, take it away.
Thank you. All right, so my slide came up just a second ago, but really what I wanted to point out here in our district, we cover over 3,000 square miles. It sounds a little more impressive in kilometers, so over 8,000 square kilometers. We have 3,800, just over that, students at about 14 schools in our school division. And we have about 1,700 students that ride the bus. But when you think about 1,700 students spread across that vast area, the majority of them live very rurally and not even close to other rural students. So we're traveling long distances to pick our kids up, and we're finding one of our biggest issues is ride time and we don't have enough bus drivers or the capacity to hire more, or even if we did have the capacity to hire more, we need more buses. So yeah, we just have a lot going on, and it's not always the best. So we're working really hard to try to make sure that our ride times are as short as possible. We try not to do more than an hour, but sometimes that's impossible. We have kids that live down, I don't know if you're familiar with Glacier National Park, but we border that. So Waterton National Park, right down at the bottom of our map there, that runs right down to the US-Canada border. So we have kids that live in Waterton National Park that we have to pick up and get to school in Pincher Creek, which is about a half an hour just normally driving, but you've got to pick up all the other kids on the way. So there's a lot of long stretches, and it's a challenge. We need more buses, we need more drivers, but we can't afford either. So it's always a juggling act to kind of figure out how to make things run the most efficiently and get the most bang for our buck, and yet at the same time make sure that the students are, and parents, because they're the ones that phone you upset, but make sure that everybody's happy with what's happening and doing your best to stay organized and in control. So that's Livingstone Range School Division kind of in a nutshell there. So that's about where we're sitting as far as a division. And I know we're not alone in that. Canada, most of our Alberta school divisions are very similar to ours. I mean, there's the big centers in Calgary or Edmonton, but for the most part, this is what you're looking at, is a very large rural area with very few buses and few schools to get the kids to. So
that's great. It just helps us put a context of what you're dealing with every day.
Yeah.
So thank you, Keith. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And if you could go to the next slide here. Okay. Well, okay, you could go to one more slide then after that. Thank you. So this is just a few things I picked up along the way, but we're in a time in which we need to be flexible. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not get bent out of shape. Our government, our leaders, none of us have been through this before at all. We've only been this about 6 months, and we're trying to recreate everything. And it's I told some people yesterday at another meeting that I had is, they want to know if we want to receive some input on a policy or something. I said, we've got 5 weeks to open school. We need to say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we can do it. We'd love to be able to help them, but we've got to be able to make things happen. So I'm sure that's what our government folks are doing too, is they're trying to react to how we work in a COVID-19 world. So I think we just need to keep in mind to be flexible and be ready. And it seems like each time we get a new set of guidelines, we have a lot more questions after that. So that's one piece. If you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So one of the things we do here in Minnesota, and I help lead this every Friday morning at 7:15, we've been doing it for the last month or so, is we have what we call the Transportation Issues Committee. It used to be the Department of Education that had that, but I've kind of just kept it going. And I think what we've all said is it's so good to communicate with everybody, because we're all trying to solve this problem at the same time, and we're rebuilding everything all at the same time in a new world. And so it's just so good to have time to talk to each other about what might be going on. So what we've done is we review the Minnesota Department of Education updates, and we get them almost weekly. And so they usually come on a Wednesday or Thursday, and so that's why we've chosen a Friday morning, is to kind of do our nighttime reading and then figure out what did they really say, what did they do. And we've had a number of guest speakers come and talk to us about that. We also had the Minnesota Department of Health. We review their guidelines as well. The Minnesota Department of Health really seems to be driving a lot of the guidelines that we are trying to work under, so we review both of those. Through this process, through Transfinder's webinars, and through the STARTS program, things like that, we have tried to review what other states are doing during COVID-19. I think Las Vegas, Nevada, Houston, Texas, Frederick County, Maryland. I think there's a few other school districts that we've kind of taken a look at just to see what they've been doing. We've also talked about equipment on buses. What kind of signs do we have to put up to make sure that kiddos are wearing their masks, that they're washing their hands, that they're keeping 6 feet apart. If they're sick, stay home, that type of thing. Also, are we putting up clear barriers for bus drivers or kids, things like that? And just the question of hand sanitizer, and should it be on the bus, and who could it be for, and just all kinds of, like I say, getting into the weeds of things a little bit. Also looking at ideas of, should there be policy changes that we have during COVID-19? For instance, in Minnesota, we're not required to transport anybody less than 2 miles from school, although most of us do. So is that a tactic to take, is to say, if we can't have as many kids on a bus, then we need to drop the number? How can we do that? I don't know of anybody who's changing walking distances, but that is something that could be done. Also looking at some districts where students could get on and off buses at different stops, and maybe even on different routes. They might get on at the daycare provider and go home at the end of the day, or they might get, and the next day they might get on at home and flip it around. And just the idea of keeping students on one bus, one cohort, so that if there is transmission of the disease, we know where they've been. In Minnesota, we've also been doing is what we call meal and emergency care worker routes. We did that in the spring, in April and May, where we had routes, buses go out to serve meals. And then if people were considered an emergency care worker, we actually took them to a daycare or things like that, just to help them out, so we could care for their kids, so they could care for us. And then the next thing is how to be flexible in a changing scenario from 1, 2, or 3. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'll help you with that. So number 1 is full school, number 2 is hybrid, and number 3 is distance learning. And last Thursday we had a rollout of, actually there's 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3. So if you look at the kind of the blue lines, so what we're doing is in Minnesota is if you fall between the 0 to 9 cases per 10,000 of 14 over 14 days, we do in person. If you did 10 to 19, you do in-person learning for elementary and hybrid for secondary. And 20 to 29, it'd be hybrid for all grades. And 30 to 49 would be hybrid learning for elementary kids, distance learning for secondary, and 50 and above would be distance learning. So while we've been trying to plan what we might be looking at doing, it really lent the idea to be that many of us have set up that we're just going to run our regular routes, try and set up our regular routes, run them the way we would normally do, and then divide the student population in half. So if we have to do a 50-50, we could just say, okay, it's day A, it's day B, and that's how we would do it. But that's how Minnesota at least has taken a look at how we're rolling forward. So this just came out last week, and so we even had to ask the question, did you create some half steps between the 1, 2, and 3? And they confirmed with us that yes, indeed, that's how this was moving forward. So the next slide, if we could go to that. Some of the other topics we've been talking about is picking up and drop off around schools, and we had a company on our webinar or meeting last week that really helps design traffic around schools, and just talk about how we can create more sidewalk space, things like that, because we're taking a survey of how many kids are going to come to school and how many are going to ride a bus, and then from then we're going to base how many kids are going to end up driving, walking, biking, that kind of thing, and try and help create traffic flow around the schools. So we talked about that. Temperature screening of students on buses, we're not recommending that. And just in my opinion anyway, is that a bus driver has got so much to do already with looking for kids as they approach a stop arm, making sure that nobody passes the bus, letting kids on the bus. They've got so much to do now. To take their eyes and attention off of that to do health screening is something I would not recommend or move forward on. The other piece is, this was the biggest one. How many students can we have on our buses? The 77 passengers, 3610. And it wasn't until just a few weeks ago that we learned that we can go up to 50% if we're doing a 50-50 model, although we need to keep any passengers at least 6 feet away from the bus driver. So we can go to about 34 students on a 77 passenger bus. And so that's part of our math problem that we're trying to figure out, is how to make this happen. Student attendance and tracking, and I think that may be a question we come back to, is how do we do that? You know, we've worked with our bus companies so far on a route sheet that will have their names on it with if they're coming day A or day B, and it's just a checkoff piece. That's the paper way to do it. We've been looking at, let's see, under the 50-50 scenario, what are other school districts doing? Just talking about that at our issues committee meeting. Special ed process and personal protective equipment for the bus driver and staff, just what we need to do there. And then staffing, and to me, we can do all kinds of plans, all kinds of great things, but staffing to me is going to be probably the next biggest issue. Who's going to come to school if they don't feel it's safe for them? Who's going to come and teach? Who's going to come and drive? I think that's the next one. We also had Safe Routes to School folks come and talk to our group just about if kiddos aren't going to be on the bus, how can they get to school? And then in our school district in the state of Minnesota, we talk about responsibilities for non-public schools. If they're in our school district and they ask us for transportation services, we can turn around and say, okay, we will provide you, but this is the time you're going to go and have school, and this is the dates you're going to go. And so we just want to clarify that if we're doing a 50-50 scenario, how would that happen? So we think we've got that straightened out. If you want to go, I think I got one more slide here. Yeah, so this is some final thoughts on just not on the nuts and bolts of things, but just kind of how, at least I go on to try and approach things, is we're in a world where we've never been before, and there's a lot of things I cannot control. But I'm a firm believer I can control my attitude and my response to something. I think of things like we've just learned what flatten the curve means. We've learned what social distancing was, and I thought being Swedish, I thought that was just a natural thing, but no, apparently that's a new thing. Hybrid, I drive a hybrid car. Now it's a way that we're going to put routes together. And distance learning, I thought, meant that somebody sat in the back of the class, but now it's a whole different thing and how we go about business. But anyway, there's new things. But anyway, to try and keep a positive attitude, because that's one thing I can try and control. The next thing is to put in the time you need to know what you need to know. When you get documentation with things like that, directives, new policies, new things that come out from the state guidelines, get to know them, because we are the only people really sometimes in our school district that have the transportation perspective. And so we need to have that lens and part of the conversation so that when we hear something, see something, that we understand it so we can work with folks in our school district. And then I think the second one or next one down there is to help find solutions. We can always find the problems, but finding the solutions is why we're all here. And I think we're all here right now because of who we are. And that's part of our job, is to find the solution and help out. So that's just it. And stay healthy, wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick. Those are types of things. But this is something I saw just the other day, and I thought that this is so true, is that sometimes we're tested not to show our weakness, but to discover our strengths. And I think this is a time for us to step up and discover our strengths. So that's it.
That's great. Thanks so much, Keith. It is inspiring. Two quick things. One is, how long are your meetings, those issues meetings?
They're 7:15, 8:45.
Okay. And then somebody actually is online named Michelle who said, how can I be part of those? So I don't know if those are open for outside of your district.
You can certainly send me an email. It's typically Minnesota that is on the line. We're talking directly to Minnesotans about our issues, but you can certainly send me an email. We've got about 108 people each Friday morning.
That's great. Thanks so much, Keith. I appreciate it. Okay, we can advance the slide. We'll turn it over to Tim. Share a little bit with us about what's going on with you and the districts you're working with, but also the STARTS Task Force.
Great, thanks, Rick, and thank you, Keith and Kristi. So I want to take you quickly, just in the event that you have not had an opportunity to either see or go through the STARTS Task Force material, take you quickly through what's available there. When you get a moment, if you haven't seen it yet, please go to startstaskforce.com. There you'll be able to find the report. You'll be able to find all the associated downloads. It's also available on the Transfinder website as well. So if you can go there and find it also. If we can go to the next slide, what the STARTS Task Force was really all about was ultimately the industry coming together in order to try to address this problem. To a lot of things that Keith was alluding to and what he was talking about. It was made up of representatives from the key associations within the transportation industry, so NAPT, NASDIPS, and NSTA. And what was a very smart decision on the part of both the executive committee and the steering committee was the design of the structure, which included participation from each of the associations as a co-chair on 3 of the key operating committees. Those committees focused on health and safety, they focused on communications and advocacy and public relations, and then on looking at questions of scheduling and routing and school bus design. So in addition to having the perspective of practitioners as committee chairs, there was a huge group of volunteers underneath that assisted their individual committees in the ways that the committees felt was best to use those volunteers. So we had 75 folks participating in that. There was also an advisory committee made up of representatives from the OEMs and from some individual specialties, including National School Nurses, National School Boards Association, and we also had Sue Schutrump and Linda Bluth working with us to address specialized populations. So whether not only just special needs, but also questions of homelessness and foster care that needed to be addressed within the context of how is that response going to occur as a result of COVID. So Decision Support Group was one of the co-managers. We were fortunate to work with Jim Regan and Gabby Gastali from Capital Works in order to put together the set of deliverables that have been provided to the industry. And if we go to the next slide, what you can see is ultimately what we wanted to do was to be different than what had come out previously. And what we meant by different was to be something that could be practically used in the pursuit of a reopening strategy for each individual district. So we went through 50 different reopening plans, whether they were state level reopening plans or DOE plans. We also went through some plans in the private sector, things like Walmart and Disney and Starbucks. And some of the questions were, why would we look at those? And one of the key criteria for us was recognizing that transportation facilities are beehives of activity with a tremendous amount of throughput of people. So how are we going to manage the health and safety of staff and manage that throughput? And so places like Disney and Walmart and Starbucks gave us some perspective on those kind of things because they deal with lots and lots of people. So across those 50 different reopening plans, we ended up with sort of what we described as guidelines, 27 guidelines, which were the kind of what we expected people to have to do in response to COVID and for school reopenings. And underneath that, we also had a subset of 17 guidelines specifically targeted at specialized populations, special needs students particularly, but specialized populations more generally. And within those guidelines, there was the question of if that was the what, then how do we translate that to the how in terms of what do you do? And so in order to do that, we focused on the development of 215-ish individual tasks that supported the guidelines. So some had as many as 10, others had as few as 2 or 3. And so that, again, the design here was, how do we give folks something where if they say, here's my challenge, where do I start from? It gave people an opportunity to both build a scenario plan if there was uncertainty around how their district was going to open, and if they had some guidelines that said we were going to open on a hybrid system, for example, with A and B day schedules, you could actually build a plan around that that said this is the resources that were going to be required from a transportation standpoint. So if we can go to the next slide, ultimately what we ended up with is essentially a two-part deliverable. The first part was the work that we did, which was this research and investigation and organization component of it. And then the second part was the more relevant part, I think, which is the part that you as practitioners would use. And so you'll see the report broken out that way. Frankly, from my perspective, where most of the practitioners are going to stay, or they're going to stay in sections 3, 4, and 5 of the report, which is what are the guidelines, how do I implement them, and then what do I need to be aware of, right? So section 5 in particular is forward-looking in some respects and talks about the need for transportation departments to have a structured decision-making process and a structured communications process, because in the end, no matter what you do, somebody's going to ask you why. So being on the front side of that curve and being able to explain it is really helpful. And then I think the key things, if you have not looked at the material yet, to focus on is looking at attachments A and B, which are the guidelines and their associated tasks, plus a Gantt chart that allows you to build out a plan for reopening and assign responsibilities and assign timelines, and to use that as a mechanism for you to be able to oversee your own reopening strategy. And everything else in the report is research and information that can help inform which one of the strategies you choose to pursue. If we can go to the next slide. And so again, as you're going through it, I think, as I mentioned, this really was, in my opinion, a best representation of how the industry can function when it comes together to solve a problem. It represented all 3 of the associations. The contact folks who are the executive directors of the associations are included here. If there's questions and you want to reach out to them, there are questions on the materials. Once you have a chance to look at them, we would encourage you to reach out to Jim Regan or reach out to me. We're happy to answer whatever those things are, because one of the things that we hope to do is to keep these things being a living set of documents. So as things change, so for example, on the off chance that a school might close at some point during this whole reopening strategy, one of the things that we'll have to think about is how do we build in that closing and reopening process into the guidelines and tasks. And so that's one of the things that we're focusing on now in terms of how do we make amendments and addendums to those resources to be able to provide some guidance around those. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's a lot of information. We've been lucky to we've had Mike, Charlie, and Kurt on several times. So I would encourage you to go back to some of the earlier task force webinars just to get a sense of some of if you're looking for more details on what went into, and Tim was on those as well. A lot of work has gone into this product that you guys released, which it is very in-depth, very useful. So here's a question for you. By the way, Nancy will let you know that PowerPoint will be on transfinder.com most likely in 2 days, and this whole webinar will be broadcast as well on our homepage as well. So just kind of give me a sense of, and I'm going to start with you, Kristi, and then anybody else can jump in as well, is 2 things. One is, how was this year different than past years? I mean, what's your biggest challenge? And I'm just curious, everybody's different, but did you have multiple contingency plans, and have they gone, or have you just said we're going to wait till the dust settles before we come up with a plan? I've seen a variety of approaches. So I'll start with you, Kristi. Just biggest challenge that you're facing.
Probably our biggest challenge in the moment is that all of our schools want detailed information about who's riding the bus every day and who they interacted with. So that's our biggest challenge. And like was mentioned, I think Keith mentioned that it's paper and pencil. I don't know that some of our drivers don't even own cell phones. So to have an app or to try to all of a sudden teach them software, I think is going to create more problems than it solves. So I think paper and pencil is how we're going to have to go with that one. Planning this year has been different in that we're updating a lot of our processes and policies in sanitization and cleaning the buses and making sure that all of that is safe and kept up to date. We're using COVID as a motivation for some change that has needed to happen for quite a while in our division. And so we're using that as well to kind of jump off and do some of the changes we've been planning outside of COVID, but this is a really good time. If we're going to change something, we might as well just throw it all in at once. As far as contingency plans, we had 3 plans for our division that were kind of laid out, option A, B, and C. However, it was A, B, and C, and we had no control over what was chosen. So our provincial government has mandated that we are going back to school in a near normal capacity, and that is what every school division has to offer. However, that doesn't mean that our parents are going to follow what has been mandated. So we're having parents who are going to decide what they want to do. And then the provincial government just this morning, actually, just 10 minutes before we got on here, like breaking news, yeah. So now they've mandated masks for every student grade 4 and above. All of our bus drivers, they will be mandating masks and shields for all of our teachers. All of that stuff is coming, and they're providing it, which is great because I'm not quite sure where we were supposed to get it because it's really hard to come by PPE stuff right now. So yeah, we're working on the whole mask thing and trying to teach the kids how to wear masks properly, trying to teach our bus drivers how to wear masks properly, and all of that stuff. So there's lots of challenges, but as of right now, it's information. Everybody wants information and nobody has any. So it's tough.
A quick question for you before I go to Keith. How much do you share with parents, like incrementally, when it could change? Do you kind of wait, if you share something on Wednesday and then it's changed on Thursday, they had to go back to them on Friday and then they don't know if they, so do you have to delay, or do you just share it and say it's going to be an open flow, and if it changes, we're just going to keep letting you know the change?
I actually think that's somewhere where we've dropped the ball a little bit as far as communicating and being transparent with our parents and with students. We haven't really said a whole lot as far as transportation goes from our school division yet, because we didn't know what it was going to look like. We didn't have any answers, and so we're not quite sure. I think it's hard, it's tough. Our school division did put out a survey just last week, but now that survey is basically null and void because now the province just mandated masks. So then that changes the responses for everybody that just did the survey to see whether they were going to ride the bus or not. So it's hard because every 10 minutes there's something new happening that then changes the criteria for all of the information you just gathered. So it's a rolling ball down a very steep hill, and it's hard to keep up with everything. So I am open to people calling and asking questions, and I answer as best I can, but it's really hard to send out mass communications when there's not a whole lot to put in them. So
Right. And quick question for you while I have you, because I got a question from Paula saying, are drivers wearing a shield when students load and unload?
I believe that is the intention, is that they'll wear the masks all the time, and then the shields are for loading and unloading. They will not wear the shield while driving.
Okay, very good. Keith, biggest challenge this year and contingency plans?
Yeah, I wanted to think of the biggest challenge, and I think for me right now, we open school in 5 weeks from today. So time, I think, is the biggest challenge. We're still creating this thing, and yet we've got 5 weeks to go. We have just heard last week from the governor about the different, how we might have school. And then our school district has said we're doing the hybrid, the 50-50. So that's the direction we're headed as we roll things out. And to say, I think how has planning been different? We usually get our student information the early part of July, and we spend 2 months getting ready for school and all the details and the bus load counts and and putting things together efficiently. And now that's all been kind of changed in that we have 5 weeks to kind of do the same thing. So it's just going to be much more difficult. But what we did is, at least many of us around in this part of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, has tried to kind of keep it simple, and that was to plan as though we're going to have full school until we heard otherwise. And so we've been building our routes and systems with that idea, and then we take load counts each year. We have our actual riders, and then we have our, I should say, our predicted riders, and then our actual. And so we have a pretty good idea percentage-wise the number of kids that ride each high school, middle school, elementary. And so we could kind of predict if based on this percentage or based on this plan, if it was 50-50, if we took half the kids, what's the target number we would need to hit, and will the bus meet that? Will the bus allow that many kids to be on the bus? And so, you know, some of us here just put together sort of an idea. Well, if we go 50-50 and how many students, then this would be this plan. And if it was less riding a bus, it would be this plan. If it was less riding the bus, it would be this plan. So we tried to have something like a good dispatchers. You always want to have the next plan in your hip pocket to pull out in case you've got to switch. So, but we primarily went with the full schedule planning, and that's actually working out quite well for where we are today.
Paul, just piggybacking a little bit about what Kristi spoke about for you as well. How are you keeping your parents up to date? What's your approach?
Well, the school district has been communicating each step of the way what we know, and at least kind of some timelines of, for instance, when the governor had not, he said that at the end of the month we'll tell you what your plan is going to be. So communication to all families was that once we hear that within 5 days, we will let you know what our plan is. So while we didn't know specifically what we were going to do as a district, we could at least inform families that we're aware of the timelines. We'll try and keep communications open with you as much as we can. We've also just sent out a survey yesterday based on the plan, or based on the rollout that we're going to do that's due next Monday. Just what I said earlier is, are you going to come to school? Are you going to ride the bus? Just so that we can get a better idea of what's coming up.
Any idea of if, you know, are you seeing are you expecting a high number of parents saying, I'm not ready to send my kids on the school bus yet, I'm gonna, or even send them to school? Any idea, or it's too early?
I don't, it's too early. I mean, it's been out less than 24 hours and we haven't seen any results yet.
Okay, we'll have to bring you back on.
As far as our school division, I think most people are going to send their kids to school. A lot of people don't have a choice. There's no other option. So, you know, they're having to go back to work. They're, you know, all that kind of stuff. So they're going to, I think there will be a percentage that do stay home. And because our school division is offering at home school, not homeschooling, but learning at home. So there is that option to sign up for that rather than having your child in class, or you can full on sign up for a homeschooling program. But I think we're going to see about a 75% grouping of kids. We're going to be pretty much normal. I don't think it's going to impact us a whole lot, especially now that they've mandated masks. I think that's going to make people feel a lot more safe and secure in sending their kids.
Tim, how about you in terms of the districts you're working with? You know, their biggest challenges. Can you kind of give me a grouping of what you'd say their biggest challenges are? And yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, and I think they're very similar actually to what both Kristi and Keith have talked about, right? Is this idea of, and I find it to be sort of a weird dissonance, right? In terms of people wanting certainty about certain things and the system not really actually being able to accommodate that, right? Like we drive 43-foot buses that we can't quarter up and send them in different directions. So the fact that we might want to do something is not really feasible given the nature of the system itself. And I think one of the things that has been not ignored, but maybe misunderstood as part of this process, certainly from the customers that we've seen, is the idea that I'm a huge believer in flexibility. Sometimes there just isn't a ton of it though, right? Because there are certain fixed elements of the system that we have to be cognizant of. And one of them is the asset itself, right? And so I think, you know, managing that in an environment where they say, well, we're going to send half the kids to school, during, days A and the other half in day B, that's fine, except if all the A kids live on one side of the town, right? And then I may not have enough assets to do that. And then I may have a ton of empty seats on the B days. And if we're just doing it alphabetically, I'm not a cryptographer, but I think there's probably a hell of a lot more A's than Z's, right? So I think the ability to balance those things, really strikes me as a challenge from an operational standpoint. And I think all of those things are wrapped up in this question of, how many kids can we put on the bus, right? I think all that uncertainty bubbles up into that one single question. And it's been the thing that I've struggled with the most, because I continue to believe it's actually the wrong question to ask, right? I mean, we've said on a number of occasions, my opinion, the right question to ask are, what are the conditions that exist that I can put kids on the bus? And then let me put as many as I possibly can under those conditions. But don't tell me that I can only put 48, because if I can get 60 on safely, essentially what you've just done is required me to find 25% more resources that I don't have.
Hey, Tim, how about something? So on Keith's slide where he talked about the school, it was the slide, Bridget, I don't know if you can go back to the one slide that had if A, then B. It was like, could you have that kind of approach with the bus? If you hit certain.
There you go. That one?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
I might be slower on it. That's the one. Yep.
Yeah.
Could you do something like that, Tim? I mean,
yeah, to me, I think this is, I don't know precisely how it would work out, but this is exactly, in my mind, the kind of thinking that we want to try to bring to this, right? And that we as professionals can bring to this, that say, understand where the threshold points are, and understand how much flexibility I have around the thresholds, right? And I think all of that gets lost when we say, just tell us how many kids you want on the bus. Like,
I think
I know
the
we
same thing
need
applies.
that.
They're telling us the same thing. Like, the same thing applies with your kids are just going to go to school. We're going back to school. Okay, that's great. But how are we going back to school? And, there was just we only have so many teachers. We only have so many classrooms. We only have so many buses. We only have so many drivers. And we can only do what we can do within our resources. So it's kind of, we almost need to be telling the government what we can do rather than the government telling us what to do.
is that what you would prefer?
I would prefer that.
Because I think it's a mix. I think some would.
Will they allow that? No, I don't think so.
I think it's a balance that we need to strike, because we're all trying to fight COVID and have school at the same time, and that's and that's just the magic that we're trying to make here, is to how does that all fit together.
One of our attendees just sent a note that that her state is allowing 50. It's Kristi. Hey, Kristi. Our state will allow 50 kids in a unit. A unit is described as a huge gym at school or a school bus. Makes no sense in Kristi's perspective. Our state's also mandating temperature checks by the drivers. So that's just going against what you were saying, Keith, about distraction and concern. And we've had several webinars in which I don't think we've had one panelist yet say that they would recommend temperature checks at a bus stop, just because what happens when you have a student that does have a high temperature, you're not going to leave them at the bus stop. So, so I want to go quickly, because Kristi touched on the idea of attendance on the bus. So we do have a poll that we'd like to pull up on the screen here, and then we're going to take about a minute for any attendees. If you could take a moment to fill this out. And I'm going to ask Kristi, you already given me your answer, so I'm going to ask Paul, how are you taking attendance on the bus? Are you using a card reader, software application? Do you have no plans to take attendance on the bus? Do you want to, but you're not sure how to take that next step? Or is it pen and paper, but you're interested in technology? So I'm going to ask you, Paul, but for our attendees, you have about a minute, if you could fill out this poll as well.
Paul? Rick, I think you meant Keith, right?
I'm sorry, Keith. Yes, I was so good, and then I messed up.
You were good. So, like Kristi said, we're looking at printing out a different kind of a route sheet that has day A and day B next to the student's name, and so that the driver can take attendance. But I will say that I did speak with someone from Transfinder last week, and we're trying to see if this would work. Is the app that is called Transfinder Go, and I still need to get it to work on my phone. But if that's something where you could take attendance, because otherwise then you're not doing a two-step process where you're checking it on a sheet and then handing it in, and someone else logs in the computer for you. You just click it and it would tell you. But if that's successful, great. If not, we do have the paper and pencil, and they probably take 5 days worth of work, 5 days worth of attendance, and keep that on our sheet.
Okay, thanks, Keith. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Bridget, we'll come back to you in a minute. Let me know when you get the tally on that. I appreciate it. So one question I had, so one quick thing I want to let you know. So Luann tells us that her district, they're making the parents responsible for the temp checks before they bring the student to the bus stop, and the student has to sign a slip. No slip, no entry on the bus. So I just wanted to share that. So I just have a question about, in terms of, in the midst of all of this uncertainty, are there any lessons that you've learned? You know, Paul had on that last slide about, you know, strengths. I'm sorry, Keith.
You started it, now it's a slippery slope.
That you know, these tough times can reveal your strengths, not just weaknesses. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you have had, you know, in terms of a lesson learned that maybe will serve you well long after the pandemic's over. You know, at Transfinder, we've done definitely some things differently in terms of our efficiency. We're just extremely efficient, and you know, it came out as a result of necessity, basically. So I'm going to throw it out to all three of you, anywhere you can answer in any order you want. So, lessons learned.
So I think of
So
in our school district that many in our school district we have a number of schools, so principals can all talk to each other. What we've learned is through our professional organizations, it's so key to have that relationship, because we're all faced with the questions and we want to share that information about what do we think of this, how are we doing this. We're all trying to solve the problem. So I think it's the relationships we have with fellow people in the transportation industry, but also people within our own school district and within the cities that we serve as well. Because one of the things we talked about last week at one of our meetings was just, if we're going to have unusual traffic around our schools, is to work with our cities if we need to get some help from police or others to help us with traffic flow around schools. I just feel it's the relationships that we have built over the years that are lasting, and that we all have the same kind of goal in mind, and we're all trying to help each other. And so I think it's been while the pandemic is a terrible thing, you know, I see that there's so many good people out here trying to do the right thing for kids.
Great, awesome. Anybody else?
I think my biggest lesson that I've learned is no judgment. There is no right, there is no wrong. Everybody is just doing the best that they can. None of us have dealt with this before. This is a completely new situation. So there really isn't an expert in how pandemics should be handled with a school or in a government or anything. I mean, none of us have dealt with this before. So, and everybody's unique. Even within, you know, a school division, there's unique schools within that division that the answers for school A aren't going to work for school B. So, and that's okay. It's okay to be different. It's okay to have different approaches, and you might have multiple approaches even within your own approach. You might have to break it down into different ways. So I found that to be a big lesson. And the other one I found really important is things like this, the webinars, and Keith talked about, you know, interacting with colleagues and being up to date on what your administrators and principals are doing, and really just communication. I find just as long as you're talking to people, you're going to find those tidbits of information that you never thought of, or a way to a solution to a problem that you just couldn't find, but somebody else already has it, and there's no need to recreate the wheel. Most people are more than willing to share what they've got and policies, procedures, all those kinds of things. People are willing to share that information. So there's no need to redo work when we can all piggyback off of each other and help each other out. And I feel like the pandemic has really helped in that regard. People are just so much more willing and giving than maybe previously. And I hope that continues, because I think that it can do nothing but be positive and help us in the future.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kristi. Tim?
Yeah, and I'll say, I think for me in particular, the ability to just say, I don't know, I just don't know, right? I mean, and I'm supposed to be in like a knowing business, right? And having answers business kind of thing. That's sort of supposed to be our deal. But this thing has really done two things for me, which is one, I think taught me not to necessarily commit to a single idea and say, and I think this is derivative of this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we do it thing, right? And how do you break that thinking paradigm? I think that this thing has certainly done that for me. And I think the other piece of it is that part to say, what's an answer here? And there just isn't a good one sometimes. And so I would rather say I don't know than to say there isn't one, right? Because we are going to be making the best of bad choices throughout this thing. So like the more we don't commit to the previous ideas that we had, the easier it becomes to, I think, define what the best option or the best worst option is.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking of like Sophie's Choice, it's like no good choice.
Mm-hmm.
No good choice. Well, the time flew by. Tim, as you were talking, I was also thinking about that superintendent I read about in the very beginning. I think that's kind of where he's coming from, don't know it all, trying to figure it out. So first of all, thank you. The time absolutely flew by. I knew it would. So I just want to thank you again. I want to ask Tony to come on board and say some closing comments. Before he says something, I'm going to ask Bridget if you can give us the poll results, though. Bridget.
Hi. So both card readers and software applications as methods for taking attendance, 6% will be using those. 31% have no plans, and 27% want to but aren't quite sure how to yet, and 39% are planning on pen and paper, but they're interested in some technology solutions.
Oh, awesome.
I'm sorry, guys. Do you mind if I shared it?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Press the share.
Thanks. Thank you, Bridget. I appreciate that. Tony, you want to say a few words before I close this out?
Actually, it's very important that this is a good thing. So I clicked the share and I'm going to then hide it. Interesting about the pen and paper. Obviously, we do have tons of reports that let you do that. And we have tons of, we're about to launch a new product called Wayfinder that does do the car reader, does navigation. So there's a lot going on. Obviously, I wish we had it right now, but I think you just said about Rough-Finder Go, how it really is an app. So there's tons of ways we could help you. So please, 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 please reach out to us at Transfinder, because we have a lot of ways we can help you. We obviously have done this for many years, not for this reason, of course, but I think for attendance, we always thought attendance is an important aspect. It's part of being efficient, is to take attendance. So we've had the attendance flag flying for years, and I think this is where if you go with the technology side, it's very expensive. But listen, we could have another topic about this another time, but thank you. Really, my takeaway is that we really can't make a decision. You got to go with the gut feeling, and also something happens, you got to be able to change. I think, unfortunately, could happen that there's enough cases that I love that grid, by the way. That grid is a powerful grid that you literally said, if you got this percentage of cases, this is what you need to do. I think that's one of the best screen I've seen in a long time, Rick. I bet you.
It takes that like thinking on your feet out of the equation, and just there it is.
It's actually it's a formula. That's a formula right there. Agree. That's a formula. It's a good way to say, hey, if this happens, if this, then this, right? So I
That's it.
love, hopefully we don't have to go, we don't start one way and then have to change midstream. So hopefully that's for that case for, I think the economy could take a big hit. Who knows, guys? Just want this 2020 to be over with. I think all of you agree, but it's not going to happen automatically. You guys know we are here to support you if you're our clients. If not, we want to help you. We want to help everybody. We're dedicated to this industry. So again, Rick, Kristi, Keith, by the way, you should be calling Rick, you should call him Derek. That's a good way to call him, you know? A good way to get back at him.
All right, Derek, thanks.
Oh, and of course,
You know, I kept saying I was not going to do it, and then once you highlighted it, then it just became more ingrained. Thanks a lot, Keith.
listen, guys,
So I want to thank you so much, Tony. I want to thank you again, Tim, Kristi, and Keith, for joining us today. I think there's a lot of takeaways. We'll have this PowerPoint as well as this webinar on the transfinder.com site later this week. I want to highlight something else. If you have a story to share, these webinars come as a result of our feedback from you, and that could be anybody in North America. It does not have to be a Transfinder client, just anybody who's doing something that we can learn from. Just like we just highlighted Keith's slide, if we can learn something and other people can borrow from that, that's what we want to do. So you may find yourself in a future webinar or part of a white paper if we can learn something from you. So that's my story at transfinder.com. I also want to say that we are doing a panel I haven't set a hard date yet with it, but sometime this month, where I'd like to feature school bus drivers. And Kristi, I saw you're already on this panel, so I'll be reaching out to you. Now another Kristi, not you, Kristi Edwards.
I was worried because I've never driven a bus.
But Keith has, so I may bring Keith back on. But so you know, this is the front lines folks here, and I want to hear what's going on with them. So if you are interested, if you're a school bus driver and you're interested in being in a panel to tell us about what your thoughts are going into the new school year, please, you can also email mystory@transfinder.com and just put bus driver in the subject line, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Until then, I want to just thank everybody. I hope you have a great day, and we will see you next week. That's August 11th. Until then, have a great day, and thanks again for joining us on this webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.